Hello, youth. Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful week, enjoying the sunshine. It's beautiful outside. We're going to get right into it. Just a reminder, this Sunday is the Splatter Box, so invite your friends and bring a change of clothes. We are going to enjoy a fun time there and sling some paint. We're going to continue in Hebrews 11, and today we're going to be finishing up verse 32 and doing verse 33. So we've talked about Samuel last week. And this week, the author of Hebrews lists the group of people called the prophets. This is a kind of a broad term because, as we'll see, the idea of a prophet in their mind kind of captured more than just like who we think of as the prophets, like Jonah and all these folks. Like they view Daniel as a prophet. Daniel was a prophet. But they also kind of seem to talk about like David and some of these other guys as if they were kind of prophets too. But it says prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, and stopped the mouths of lions. So those first three things are kind of general, and those are kind of things that leaders should be doing for their people. You know, conquering kingdoms, taking over and providing safety to the nation around you by fighting against your enemies who could pose a threat. Enforcing justice. This is something that a good leader ought to be doing. An example of this is, Solomon. One of the examples of his wisdom is when he has the situation with the two moms, and he rightly discerns which is the real mother of the child, and thus enforces right justice. And then, obtaining promises. And this one's a little different because really like one of the main people who does this is David, who receives the promise from God that he will have an heir on the throne. And at first, the people are kind of looking for who's this going to be? Is it Solomon? Is it Solomon's kid? And as they go down the line, it's like, nah, these guys ain't it. And then we get to Jesus and we find out some really cool news about who Jesus is. But for this week, I want to talk about this last one, which is very specific. And that is that they stop the mouths of lions. And when we read that, our brain should jump back to Sunday school where we read about Daniel in the lion's den. So if you would like to go read that story, it's in Daniel chapter 6. It's a Bible classic. But in this story, Daniel is becoming more and more esteemed with King Darius. Darius was a king of the Persians, and Israel was controlled, or Judah was controlled by the Persians at this time. And Daniel, even though he's an Israelite, he is gaining status, and he's gaining esteem with this king to the point where the king is actually looking to move Daniel into a leadership position, like run the kingdom. And the other Persians and other guys around him, they don't like it because this foreigner is doing this thing, and they seek to get Daniel removed. And the only way they can do it, they can't find, dude's good at his job. And, if you ever want something to be said of you, if the people who don't really like you, whether it's at your work or at school, if the only thing they can say is like, well, they're dang good at what they do, that means you're probably good at it. But they can't find anything wrong with Daniel except for his worship of his God. And so they go to King Darius and they're like, hey, why don't you make this stupid law that says that if anybody worships anything but you, we throw them into a lion's den. And they makes this law. And what's interesting is Daniel doesn't hear that law and then react and go out and do more of it. He just keeps doing the same thing that he was regularly doing, praying 3 times a day. And these officials, they go out and they narc on Daniel, and they're like, hey, Daniel's praying to his God, not you. And don't forget your law. You can't change it, because if you change it, you'll have to admit you're wrong. And this king's got a little bit of pride, and so he won't change the law. And so as a result, Daniel is thrown into a den of hungry lions. And what's interesting is the king is, other than just change your law, admit you've made a mistake. But he didn't want Daniel to die. It says that he couldn't sleep, and as soon as day broke, he hauls out to this den, peers in, and there is Daniel chilling with the lions, unharmed. And they lift Daniel up out of this pit, and then consequently these ne'er-do-wells who got Daniel in trouble. The king tosses them in, and they get munched. But he brings Daniel out, and he restores him. And then King Darius, who, remember, is like, he's interacted with Daniel. He knows a little bit about Daniel's God through interacting with Daniel, but like may not be a believer in the God of Israel himself at this point. This is Darius's response to seeing this situation happen. Darius says, "He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel showed faith, and he showed faith by doing one thing: pursuing his God even when it was difficult. That's how Daniel showed faith. Because King Darius made a law that said, you don't do that. You don't pray in this way or at this time or to this God. And Daniel said, this is what I do, because this is who I believe in. And he continued to do it despite it being difficult. And as a result, God took that awful situation, being thrown into a pit of lions, to reach a king, Darius, and have him acknowledge that God is a God worth at least following in this life, and that he rescues and he saves. And so, yes, it stopped the mouths of lions, but that was an act of faith that led to further glory for God. And so, look for ways to express and live out your faith, even when it's difficult. I have never told you, and no one should have ever said that, hey, it's going to be super easy to do this all the time. Sometimes it's tough. But what we find in Scripture is when we do it, especially when it's difficult, we experience a greater blessing both now and into the future. So just a challenge for you this week: look for ways to live out your faith even when it might seem difficult. A reminder, Splatterbox is Sunday. No Sunday morning youth this week. And we will see you soon. Don't forget to fill out those permission slips online. They're at the youth pages and websites and all that stuff. You can go find those. Love you guys, and we'll see you soon.